So hello everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In our previous class we talked about Carl Jung's approach towards personality, and after that now we will talk about Alfred Adler, because now that we're done with Sigmund Freud, after that we started talking about, in the second class if you remember, we started talking about the Neo-Freudians. So after Carl Jung, today we will talk about Alfred Adler and his approach towards personality. So let's get started. Now Alfred Adler, he was a physician, he was a psychotherapist, but then the most important point here is that he was the founder of Adlerian psychology, which, as you can probably tell, it came from his name itself. But then this Adlerian psychology is also known as individual psychology. So this is one important point, that the branch of psychology, you could say, that Alfred Adler gave was individual psychology, which was also known as Adlerian psychology. So what did Alfred Adler believe motivated individuals? So according to Alfred Adler, people were driven by, he believed that people were goal oriented. So what do we mean by that in Adlerian terms? So if we remember, Sigmund Freud believed that people are driven by their unconscious, they are driven by instincts. If you remember, in the first class we talked about Eros and Thanatos. So Sigmund Freud believed that people are driven by their instincts. But what Alfred Adler believed was that people were driven, we write it here, by the desire to overcome inferiority. Now you must have heard of the word before, and we'll discuss this in detail. We'll discuss all the concepts related to his individual psychology. There we'll also study about his concept of inferiority and superiority. But what we need to remember here is that Alfred Adler's individual psychology or Adlerian psychology focused on how people are motivated by the desire to overcome their inferiority. Now, as we said, one by one we'll discuss all the topics that come under this his psychology. So let us start with what we already talked about. The very first concept would be, overcoming inferiority, and which could also be written as, or rather so let us first talk about what Alfred Adler meant by overcoming inferiority, and then you strive for superiority. So striving, when Alfred Adler said that you should strive towards superiority, or that individuals rather tend to strive for superiority and overcome inferiority. Now when it comes to Adler's superiority, what he meant by that was not, so we write it here, so he did not mean that you become superior as compared to others. It's good to be competitive, but when it comes to superiority, you do not compare yourself to others and feel superior. But what he meant was you strive for self improvement. So you try to be a better version of yourself, or you try to sharp some of your skills. So that is what Alfred Adler meant by striving for superiority. If we take an example here, let us say there was a child who has when they were, let's say, 7 to 8 or 10 years old, they were not very good at, or rather 12 years old, they were not very good at reading or studying in general. Their parents must have been supportive, but there was no pressure from the parents to be better, to do better. So pretty rare also, although these days parents have become pretty supportive. So there is no pressure from the parents to be the best, or to be maybe come first in class, but the parents have always been supportive. So this child, by themselves, they strive to be a better person. They want to do better. They are interested in academics, maybe because their parents are themselves in academics, for example. So for whatever reason, the child wants to do better. They want to improve, and they work hard for it. Maybe there is 1 or 2 subjects they are not very good at, so they work very hard for it, and maybe in the future they want to become, let us say, a professor in that particular subject, or maybe they are not very good at English, so they want to do better in that subject and then maybe become an author or maybe a professor of English. So they are striving to be a better version of themselves, to do better in that particular subject, for example, and they are doing it all on their own. They are working hard. So here they are striving for superiority, wherein they are trying to improve themselves. So this is our Alfred Adler's concept of overcoming inferiority or striving for superiority. So they don't want to, when they say inferiority, he means that you want to do better in that subject. You don't want to feel inferior compared to not anybody else but to yourself. You want to feel confident in yourself. So that is striving for superiority. Now what we have already talked about, what we previously talked about, was more focused towards how Adler believed that what kind of superiority do people strive for, do people want, do people crave. But inferiority, if we talk about, if we actually go into depth and try to understand what Alfred Adler meant by inferiority, was that he felt that whenever we are born, after we are born, so and we grow up, we become an infant, so an infant, when they start experiencing the world, they start noticing everything around it. That is when they realize that, according to Adler, they feel that they are insufficient as compared to an adult. So what Adler meant was that an infant, he believed that this is natural, that an infant feels inadequate when they compare themselves to adults. When the infant starts experiencing the world, starts noticing everybody around them, they feel a sense of inadequacy as compared to an adult. They feel that we are weak, and that weakness they want to leave behind, they want to deal with, they want to strive towards again superiority. But the inferiority that Adler meant was this, that the infants feel, the first one, the very initially the kind of inferiority that people feel after they are born, after they start to grow up, is the very first one would be when the infant feels inadequate compared to an adult. So now the infant, for example, let us say, as they are growing up, they want to gain their parents' attention or maybe their loved ones' attention and praise. So now, to compensate for this kind of weakness that they feel they have, they start to develop strengths. So they try to compensate for this weakness that they feel that they have by developing or trying to develop some sort of strength in some other field in different ways. They try to do better, they try to become like an adult, they try to idealize and become like an adult. So the important part here is that when infants are born, when children are born, they feel a sense of inferiority. A child feels a sense of inferiority as compared to an adult, and that is the very first kind of inferiority that individuals experience according to Alfred Adler. So we talked about how when a child, if they feel inferior, if they feel that they're not adequate, then they make efforts to try to compensate that feeling of inadequacy, that feeling of weakness or inferiority. But when that effort that you put to compensate, that compensation becomes excessive, becomes distorted sorry, that is when you end up with a inferiority complex. So this overcompensation to overcome the sense of inferiority or striving for superiority, when you try to overcompensate, that is when it leads to a sense of it leads to inferiority complex. So what do we see in these individuals? So what we see in these individuals is that they are consumed by a feeling of inadequacy. So they are consumed, their entire being, their entire lives are consumed by this feeling of inadequacy, which then further could lead to low self-esteem. It could also lead to anxiety, or it could also lead to withdrawal from society. So a feeling of inadequacy could, it's not necessary that it will, but when somebody is consumed by a feeling of inadequacy, when they all they can think about is that they are not enough, when that is the case, then that could lead to a sense of low self-esteem, it could lead to anxiety, or it could lead to a sense of withdrawal from the society. So what these individuals do is that they try way too hard, very hard to achieve success, but what lies deep down is a sense of insecurity. So these individuals, they try too hard to achieve success, but what lies deep down is a sense of insecurity. So this is what we need to understand. So this is about when you overcompensate, you try to overcompensate the feeling of inferiority, and when the feeling of inadequacy consumes you entirely, that is what could lead to inferiority complex, that could further lead to low self-esteem, anxiety issues, or withdrawal from the society. And what these people actually do is they try too hard, they try very hard to achieve success, but what lies deep down, maybe they have achieved success but they feel like it's not enough, and what lies deep down is a sense of insecurity, of feeling that they are not enough, that they are not doing enough. So this is about our inferiority complex. Now talking about superiority complex. So superiority complex is, deep down, the reason for acting superior here is similar to inferiority complex, but what an individual would do here is that they would start acting arrogant or superior, as the name already suggests. So they'll start acting superior or basically arrogant to hide their sense of inferiority or their insecurities. So here the person, the individual will act arrogant, will try to act as if they are superior from everybody else to hide their deep sense of inferiority. So if we take an example to understand, let us say for inferiority complex, there is an individual who is working very hard. Let us say they are an office employee, they are working very hard to achieve their targets, to achieve their goals, but they are even getting appreciated by their seniors, but they always feel as if they are never enough. So they try to overcompensate, then they are always anxious if they are doing well, how much better should they do. So there is always a deep sense of self-esteem, there is a sense of low self-esteem that the individual is suffering from, most probably. That is why they feel like they are not enough, they are not doing enough, that they are not good enough. But on the other hand, if we talk about, so this first example was about inferiority complex. Now talking about superiority complex, let us say there is a bully, somebody who bullies people. So there they are trying to establish a sense of superiority, they are being arrogant and rude, and they are, you know what bullies are, you know what they do. But back at home they feel powerless, they they feel inferior, actually they have a sense of insecurity. At home maybe they are tortured, maybe they are abused by their, let us say, their father. So that individual, to hide their sense of inferiority from themselves, they show power, they try to execute power over somebody else, maybe in the school or in college. So that is what a sense of superiority complex is. Or maybe in an office setting, maybe there is a senior, there is a CEO, let us say, who keeps reminding people of their titles, who wants people to stay in their place, because they are deep down, they are afraid to lose their power, their authority. So to hide their sense of insecurity or inferiority, they are exerting power or being arrogant, rude to others. So this is what our superiority complex is, and how it is different from our inferiority complex, because deep down the reason for their behaviors is a sense of insecurity or inferiority, but the way of acting here is different. There is a sense of arrogance here which is not there in inferiority complex most of the time. So now we move on. Now let us talk about two concepts that Alfred Adler gave, two important concepts. The very first one is masculine protest. So what do we mean by masculine protest? It is like a psychological rebellion. It is a psychological rebellion against a sense of inferiority, and this is especially seen in societies where power is equated to masculinity. So what masculine protest is, it is a psychological rebellion. So you do not do rebellion, this kind of rebellion is not physical, it is psychological. We'll discuss how you do that. So it is a psychological kind of rebellion against a sense of inferiority, which is mostly seen in cultures. It is seen in cultures where power is associated with masculinity. So we'll understand through an example. So this is what it actually is, this is what masculine protest is. Now originally this phenomena of masculine protest was observed in women who strive for dominance in a male dominated environment or society. But Later, what Adler observed was, what Adler said was that this is observed, we will write it, observed in anyone who wants to exert a sense of power or control to overcome a sense of powerlessness. So we saw what masculine protest actually is, and originally what Adler gave this concept for was, he gave it for women who strived for dominance in male dominated societies, where where men were given more importance, their values, their opinions were given more importance, they in general were given more importance than women. So in male dominated societies, when women strive for dominance, that is what masculine protest was originally given for by Alfred Adler. But later Adler gave this concept, he generalized it to anyone who wanted to assert power, to hide their sense of, to overcome their sense of powerlessness. So now if we try to understand this through an example, let us say there is a man who has always lived in a society where crying is seen as being weak. This individual, this man has always believed that because of the people around them, they have made him believe that showing your emotions or crying are a sense of are associated with being weak. So now this individual, whenever anybody around them shows emotions, especially when men around them or they themselves feel emotions and have to express them, any sort of expressions, not just being sad or crying, any sort of extreme expressions, they feel that they might be seen as being weak, they might embarrass themselves, the people around them, so they never learn to show expressions, and now they try to be tough all the time, and they avoid a sense of showing expressions, emotions, not expressions, they avoid showing emotions or being vulnerable around the people, around people who are close to them. So this is an example for a man. Now for a woman, let us say a woman in a workplace which is again male dominated, let us say. So there to assert a sense of power, to assert her dominance, she always is very arrogant or very aggressive all the time. So she does it so that she does not feel inferior from as compared to other men. So to establish a sense of dominance, she acts this way, a certain way. She acts very aggressive, more than she actually intends to do, so that she can mingle with everybody around them, the males around them. So this is an example where they again try to overcompensate. Here we try to understand what masculine protest is. Now we will move on to the next concept. Next concept we will talk about is fictional finalism. So fictional finalism are basically fictional goals that you have. Now what do we mean by that? Fictional goals could be some imagined ideals that shape our lives. Now let's quickly first write what exactly they are. So they could be unrealistic and they are also mostly unconscious. They are unconsciously formed, and they are also mostly formed during childhood. Mostly, not always, but it's right here, mostly. Now, what is fictional finalism? So they are goals, as I wrote here, imagined ideals that form unconsciously, and they could be unrealistic. So we'll understand through an example, but these are the kinds of goals or ideals that shape how our lives will go on, the kind of behavior that we will show, the kind of decisions that we will end up making. They are affected by these goals that we have in mind, these fictional goals, that these imaginary goals that we have in our mind. Now, when we say unrealistic, let us say, for example, if we talk about extremes, maybe somebody wants to be God or maybe a superhero, so that kind of unrealistic goals, and it is mostly unconscious, so you do not always think of it consciously, mostly it is unconscious. Now we'll understand how. Since it is formed during childhood, therefore there are more chances of being unrealistic, because the child does not have a lot of knowledge about the world in general. So so if we try to understand through an example, let us say there is a child who has always been ignored in their household, maybe by their parents, maybe also by their siblings, or mostly people that he loves, they have ignored him, they have not loved him back. So now he feels that maybe one day he scored very well in an exam or did very well in something and everybody praised him. So now he feels that my worth is only associated when with doing well, when I am achieving success. So that person feels, this child starts feeling that if I am perfect at everything, then only I will receive love, then only I will not be ignored. So this person develops a perfectionistic ideal, a perfectionistic trait, and that slowly develops into their adulthood. So this is something that the child wants to be perfect, but then that is again unrealistic, because nobody is perfect, to be honest. So this is one goal, to be perfect at everything. Another example could be, let us say an individual feels that once they are rich, once they achieve financial stability, that is all they need. So money is indeed very important, but let us say this individual sets aside everything, all sorts of relationships, sets aside even their own mental health, and focuses on earning, basically on their on achieving a financial stability, but not just to the point of being able to survive or sustain, but then to the point of being rich, that they so that they can afford anything. So they just want to be rich as much as possible, and for that they ignore every other thing, every other aspect of their lives. So here they feel that financial stability, or rather becoming rich, is the only thing that can make them feel safe, make them feel good about themselves. But is this really true? That is quite debatable, but most probably it is not. So it is a unrealistic kind of goal. So this is an example of this example of our fictional finalism, where you set unrealistic or imaginary goals instead, which are usually formed unconsciously, and gradually you are aware of it. It could come to your conscious as well, but since they are formed in your childhood, they can be unconscious, and above everything they are unrealistic most of the time. So this is our fictional finalism. Now we will talk about Adler's concept of styles of life. So what did he mean by that? So when he said styles of life, what he meant was the unique pattern of how individuals think, feel and behave. So what Adler meant by styles of life is the unique patterns, the unique ways in which each different individual thinks, how the individual feels and behaves. So the different ways in which people think, feel and behave, so that they to understand how they strive for superiority and how they approach life in general. So to understand how people think, feel and behave, such that to understand how they in the end strive towards superiority. So to strive towards superiority, how do people think, act and behave? Because in the end what Adler focused on was the sense of wanting to striving for superiority and overcoming inferiority. So this is what his styles of life are. Now these patterns, they can be shaped by the environment, that is their maybe their parents, teachers and everybody around them. But then he also believed that it is a creative process, that is it is not only shaped by their environment but also it did depend on that individual as well, that is we call it unique, because it also depends on the individual. Now to try to understand also this pattern, according to Adler, it is formed in childhood, so around 4 or 5 years, which is not very important. What's important is that it is a unique pattern of how you think, act, feel, behave, such that to understand how you in the end would strive towards superiority. And it is not only shaped by the environment but the individual, how they act, what kind of personality they have, that also shapes how you behave. Now behave or think. Now let us say for example there are two children and their parents so two siblings, and their parents are very strict. So one of the child, they turn out to be very obedient, they develop a people pleasing trait. But on the other hand, the other child that becomes very rebellious and they they try to rebel, they try to seek attention by not listening to their parents or the people around them, or maybe they use humor to counter the ways of their parents or anybody that is trying to be very controlling, so very strict. So this is how two different children can act in two different ways, so two different kinds of patterns of behaving, of thinking, feeling, depending on their creativity, on their individual personality as well. Because the parents, they have the same parents and more or less the same environments, but according to Adler, that is there is also a sense of creativity in an individual that decides how they will approach life or behave in general. So now let us move on to the 4 types of styles of life. We can call them personality types, but that is not exactly the term that Adler used. So he gave 4 types of ways that you approach life, that you approach problems in life, or the 4 styles of life. So let's move on to that. Now these are the 4 styles of life, we could call them. So we'll write here, these are the 4 styles of life that Alfred Adler gave. We could call them, we could relate them to personality types, but the term that Adler used was styles of life. The very first one is ruling or dominant. Now these kinds of individuals, they seek to gain control, they seek control, they could be aggressive and they could be manipulative. So the first kind is someone who we'll write it with different ink to understand. It's better to read. Now the dominant kind seeks control, could be manipulative, and they could be, write it here, they could be aggressive. Now to take an example, let us say there is a CEO, again a boss maybe, or a senior, a manager, who whenever there is a meeting, they do not let their subordinates speak. They always speak over them. They do not invite inputs. The manager does not invite inputs or seek feedbacks, and always tries to dominate, always is aggressive and even manipulative. So they do not let others speak. They are the dominant kind, the ruling kind, who does not believe in democracy, let's say. Okay, so that kind who always tries to control others, seeks control, that is what the ruling type is. So next we will talk about, now the getting type would be passive, dependent on others, and somebody who lacks initiative. So the getting type could be they are somebody who is not active but passive, that they do not want to do something on their own. They want things to happen all on their own. Like we have studied what active and passive voice is. So it is an indirect kind of thing, that you will not take initiative, as it is written here. They lack initiative. They do not take initiative. They want things to happen. They want others to do things for them. So as the word here suggests, they lean on others. They are the leaning type. So, and they are dependent on others. For example, an individual who is always dependent on their friends, family, or anybody else to do all sorts of work, to do all of their work. They do not want to work hard or do anything on their own. So this is the second kind of style of life that Adler gave. Now the third kind is the avoiding type. Now this kind of this style of life is the kind of individual who will evade problems and they will avoid risks or failures. So the third kind, that is the avoiding type, these are people who, as I wrote, they will try to evade problems or avoid anything that could be risky or that could lead to failure. For example, an individual who does not want to apply to jobs, maybe right now they are unemployed, they have just cleared maybe they have just finished their education, and now they are supposed to get a job, but they are afraid to apply. They give excuses like, that I have no interest, I'm not sure about what field of interest I have, I want to go forward with, I'm not sure what really evokes my interest, and they give such excuses to not wanting to fill the application. They don't want to apply because deep down they fear failure. They are afraid, they don't want to risk anything, they don't want to fail. So there is a fear of rejection, a fear of failure, and they try to evade problems. That is, they don't want to solve it, they want to avoid it altogether, and they do not want to make efforts because they are scared of failure. So that is our third kind, that is the avoiding type. Now the socially useful type is the healthy kind, that is they use healthy ways to deal with problems. They are cooperative and they want to contribute to the society. They wish to contribute to the society. Now the socially useful type is the one that uses, as I said, healthy ways to deal with problems, to deal with anything that any negative thing that comes in their way, and they are very cooperative, and they wish to contribute to the society. For example, there is, let us say, a teacher who wants to give their best, who works very hard to teach their students, to deliver the subject knowledge in maybe in a very interesting way, such that the students are able to understand, they are able to learn something, and when they feel that they were able to contribute, that the students are maybe scoring well and they're taking interest in their subject, that is when they feel a sense of fulfillment. So that is the kind, that is the fourth kind, that is socially useful type. And according to Alfred Adler, the socially useful kind is the only one that is the most mature, the most useful type of style of life. So this is it for our styles of life. Now we will finally talk about the different birth orders and what kind of role they play in our personality, that was given by Alfred Adler. So now we will talk about the 4 birth orders that Adler talked about. And as we already said, that Adler believed that the order in which you are born in the family also plays a role in deciding the kind of personality that you will end up having, that you will end up being. Okay, so the first one is the first point, that is the child that is born the first, that is the eldest child. All right, so the firstborns, they will be responsible. There could be somebody who follows rules, so rule abiding or rule following. They could be conservative, and they could be high achievers. So the firstborn, that is the eldest child, according to Adler, would most probably be a very responsible person, somebody you can depend on. They would be rule following, they would abide by the rules, they would follow the rules, they would not be very somebody who likes to break the rules, that kind. They could be very conservative, since they have a sense of responsibility. They feel they have to be a little conservative as well, or they end up being a little conservative, maybe being closer to the parent or spending more time with the parent, and they could be high achievers as well. So this is our first kind, that is the firstborn. Now on to the next one, that is the middle child, that is the one that is born after the firstborn, so not after the eldest one and before the youngest one, the middle child. So the middle child would be competitive or diplomatic, and they might also want to stand out, because they are kind of they are sandwiched between the elder child and the younger child, so they would want to stand out in some way. So and they could also become peacemakers somewhere, so because they are the middle child, because there could be clashes amongst the older and the youngest one. So they could also be competitive because they want to compete with the older child, that is the oldest one, the eldest one. And they could also be diplomatic, therefore they could be good peacemakers. So diplomatically handling situations, they might be good at that, and they would want to stand out. So that is our middle child. Now the youngest child, they could be social, they could be charming, they could be creative, and they could become rebellious because maybe they have been pampered too much. So the last born, maybe some of you can relate to it. So the last born would be very social, would be very charming, and since they receive a lot of pampering, they could also become pretty rebellious. This is about the last born, and now we'll talk about the only child. Now finally, if we talk about the only child, they could be mature, they might have a perfectionistic kind of attitude, they might be used to adult attention, and they could, or rather they might, struggle with peer interaction. So an only child, they maybe they are good at academics, for example, but then when it comes to maybe they are even good with dealing with adults, but when it comes to peer interaction, interacting with people of their age or maybe younger people, then maybe they are not as maybe not as nurturing, or maybe not as friendly or as charming, as good at it as would be somebody who is who has siblings. So this is our only child. So if we quickly again talk about it, the firstborn would be responsible, they would be a little conservative, they would want to follow rules, abide by the rules, and they could be high achievers because they feel they have a lot of expectations, a lot of expectations their parents have from them. So this is the firstborn. Now the middleborn could be, they could become competitive because they might want to, according to Adler, they might want to compete with their older sibling. So they might become competitive, they might be diplomatic, that is you know, they maybe they're good at dealing with people, maybe sorting issues because they are the middle child, and they might want to, they might, you'll write it here, they might want to stand out because they are the middle child, so they are kind of sandwiched, as I said, between the oldest and the youngest one, so they might want to stand out. And then we have the last born, who is usually charming and social because they receive a lot of love, a lot of attention, more than the middle and the oldest child. So they are pampered a lot, and they might become rebellious, they might crave for attention, they might use humor, or you know, maybe act like a child too much even after they're grown up. So they do all sorts of things to gain attention, and they are pretty social and charming as well. They could be creative as well. Now the only child, according to Adler, would be very mature because they do not have siblings, they do not really have many people to depend on, so they learn to do a lot of things on their own. So they might become also very responsible, mature, and they might strive for perfection, and they are also used to a lot of adult attention because there is nobody to divide the attention that they get from their parents. So all of their parents' attention, they are the ones who get it, so maybe they are used to adult attention. And also they struggle with peer interaction because maybe because they did not have siblings, and if they had let's say, you know, many people around them, many kids around them, then maybe they would not have such issues. But if they are growing in an environment where maybe the neighborhood does not have a lot of children, or they do not have a lot of cousins around them, so it is mostly the elders that they are dealing with, not anybody of their age, then they might have in the future, as they grow up, they might have some struggles with interacting with people of their own age, or people younger, of an younger age, as compared to somebody who has siblings. So this was Alfred Adler's entire concept. We talked about most of the important concepts that came under Adler's individual psychology, which focuses on how individual traits you know, form an individual's personality. So it is not all about instincts, but also about striving towards striving for superiority, trying to compensate for inferiority, and to be their best version, and you know, to how these individual traits, how the birth order and all these things, how you approach life, how your environment, how your own creativeness, how all of these form you and form the way you approach life and approach problems. So this is all about Alfred Adler's approach towards personality, his individual psychology. Now in the next class we will talk about the next Neo-Freudian. So this is it for a class today. Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for being here. For if you understood everything, please do comment if you understood. If you have any questions, do like, share and subscribe if you like today's class. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.